Bert, Maverick, Gonzalez, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You know, Maverick, it brought a smile to my face immediately when I first started learning about you because one of my favorite bosses was a Sergeant Maverick in Milwaukee. Yes, you have an evil twin in the city of Milwaukee. Jimmy Sobek was Maverick, that he was forever known as Maverick because he was a beat man when he was a copper for a while. And there was another cop calling, well, screaming for help on the radio. So he flags down a city bus, no lie, tells the driver to move over, and he drives the bus to where this copper was calling for help. It was probably like 6, 7 blocks. And he was forever known as the Maverick after that.
That's a great story. He commandeered the bus, which we
Yep.
have the authority to do, but our boss says, "No, I can't believe you did that."
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so forevermore, he was Maverick. And he
That's
was
cool.
probably one of the reasons I became a sergeant because he was such a good boss in so many different ways. And I'm like, yeah, when I grow up, I want to be just like you because everybody respected him on the street. He got instant respect. He had total respect from, captains, lieutenants, and of course his coppers loved him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I super, super nice guy. Couldn't say enough of good things. So I heard Maverick and I'm like, oh, hell yes, I got to have Maverick. So how did you get your name Maverick?
So my background is Miami-Dade police. I started in '83 when it was Metro-Dade police, and in 1988 I was having some difficulties with a supervisor. Let's say it that way, right? I wasn't the only one. I was just the first one on the list. It was the platoon lieutenant. So after I got into some trouble with him because I had a tendency to open my mouth when I didn't like something. And eventually I was transferred to from our Southwest district to our Midwest district. And I landed on the midnight field training squad. And everybody on that squad had nicknames from Top Gun. This was 1988. So you didn't pick your name. The squad had to give you your name based on your personality. It wasn't arbitrary. So the squad said to me, "Well, you've been in some trouble at Station 5 and you come with a reputation of doing things your own way. You're Maverick." And the name stuck, just like the character in the movie, right? So I really identify with the character in the movie, um, because he couldn't sit by and not say something or do what he thought was right. And it stuck. So I was Officer Maverick until I got promoted, and then it became Sergeant Maverick. And now, like your former boss, it's kind of like my alter ego and my stage name, if you will, for the podcast and the book and everything. But now everybody, when they meet my son, "Hey, you ever you somebody on the job?" "Yeah, yeah, my dad is so and so." "Oh, you mean Maverick?" So it's pretty cool, and that's the way I became known since 1988. So what your former sergeant? When did he get the name?
He got the name. He was probably, oh, he's been retired. I came on in 95. I worked with him in 2001 to 2002, and he already had it. So he probably got it in the late 80s, early 90s.
So we're right about the same time. So we
Yes.
can both claim ownership to that
Yeah.
nickname.
Yes, exactly. I was at a in service. It was like incident command training. And the lieutenant that was giving this incident command training, they had the tabletop thing. I'm sure you've been through the same thing.
I
And,
used to teach that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and, they put you through the scenarios. And it was my old partner, Boris, who's got a baritone voice, and he's a complete movie buff. He could recite movie lines like nobody's business. And Sergeant Maverick was with us as well. We were all sergeants at the time. And the lieutenant is just like looking at us and looking at us. So she's like, okay, before we start, any questions? So my partner, of course, raises his hand and he said, yes, Forrest. And he's like, ma'am, now this is in a baritone, regards to Maverick. It's nothing personal. He starts reciting the lines verbatim from Top Gun. And she says, okay, that's it. You guys are not sitting with each other. So she put us in opposite parts of the room. And because I was crying, I was laughing.
Oh,
And
that's
he
great.
just, and the
That's
whole
great.
room just erupted. And I'm like, oh God. And she's like, I've got 8 more hours with you people. And it's like,
Boris and I would get along great because I'm a movie buff too, and I can quote lines from many
oh
movies.
yeah.
And like I quoted in the book, um, I just watched again for maybe the eighth or ninth time A Few Good Men the other night.
Oh yeah.
And that Jack Nicholson line, you want me on that wall, you need me
Yep.
on that wall, or you can't handle the truth. It's just one of the most iconic lines of all cinema, right?
Yep.
And I love it. Boris and I would love to be able to talk to him. I would probably talk to each other in movie lines back and forth.
Oh yeah. Oh my. So clear something up for me here.
Sure.
Miami-Dade or Metro-Dade? What's the difference?
There is no difference. So, Florida is a big time sheriff state,
Right.
Dade County. That's where we are. In 1958, the county petitioned Tallahassee, our capital, for the home rule charter. They wanted to govern themselves. Tallahassee granted it, the legislature granted it. So in 58, we stopped having an elected sheriff, and then we had an appointed director by the county commission.
Oh, okay.
But just like any city that the mayor or the city council has power over the police chief, the county commission now picked the director of what became the public safety department after sheriff's office.
Okay.
In 1980, the name changed just before I came on, 83. The name changed to Metro-Dade. So that's near and dear to my heart and all the guys from my generation, Metro-Dade Police, because that's how we made our bones and that's how we became nationally known, Metro-Dade. So in 96, give or take, our county mayor, who wasn't a strong mayor at the time, that came later, meaning he was just another vote on the county commission. He attended a county mayor's conference somewhere in the United States. And he said, well, I'm mayor of Dade County. And they go, mayor of where? And it hit him like a hammer in the head. Nobody knew where Dade County was, right?
Okay.
Everybody knows where Miami is.
Because Miami is in Dade County, correct?
My city of Miami is in Dade County, and then we have the separate city of Miami Beach. We got Miami Shores. We got Coral Gables.
Mm.
All that stuff. South Miami, North Miami Beach. We got 36 municipalities here. It's incredible. So he petitioned and put it on the docket to change the name to Miami-Dade County for recognition, for tourism. You
Okay.
know, because if 20 years ago, if you're a layperson, you're in law enforcement, you know where Dade County is because you've heard of us.
Sure.
But the layperson doesn't have any idea where Dade County, Florida is. No idea where that is, right? So when you added the name Miami, oh, well, yeah, I know where Miami is. Of course, everyone knows where Miami is. So it became Miami-Dade County, and then we changed our name, which a lot of us didn't like. So it was Miami-Dade Police. And now, last year at the November election, after several years of lawsuits and fighting back and forth, the county didn't want to give up the appointed director of the Miami-Dade Police Department because they had control. Well, the citizens here decided we want an elected sheriff again.
Mm.
So we elected a sheriff, a former colleague of mine, Rosie Cordero Stutz, who was assistant director. And she won a tough race, but she won it. So it's our first elected sheriff since like 1958. So now it's Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office.
Oh God.
And it's all the
Miami-Dade
same.
Sheriff.
It's the same
Okay.
department. Nothing's ever changed except the name. And now they're all getting a new badge, the Sheriff's Star, the
Oh,
typical Sheriff's
sure.
Star. But inside our badge, and if you look at the cover of my book, it's got my badge on it, our badge, right? But with my badge number. But inside that badge has the Sheriff's Star. So we've
Oh,
always been the Sheriff's Department. We just didn't call ourselves that. I was really a deputy sheriff, not
okay.
really a police officer, but a deputy sheriff. So we called ourselves police because it's more common, and we have a unique uniform as opposed to the rest of the state. So now it's Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office once again. So my son now is officially a deputy sheriff, and
Okay.
my niece
So
as
you
well.
don't have a police chief now, you have a sheriff. That is an
We have an
elected
elected
official.
sheriff. All 67 counties in Florida now have an elected sheriff.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of explains it. The only other like metro that I knew of was in Vegas. I had a buddy that was a Milwaukee copper and he moved over to Las Vegas and he became a Vegas Metro cop.
Yeah,
And I did a ride along with him and it was pretty cool because if you arrested somebody, which of course we did on our ride along, we had a few of those, you went straight to the county jail. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat. Instead of jicky jacking around with different district stations with temporary holding facilities, it's straight to. I'm like, that's kind of neat. I like that.
we did that too, depending on what the arrest was.
Right, right.
So if you had a quick traffic arrest, a warrant, uh, some kind of simple battery, something that didn't require a detective follow up, or you had to, like a juvenile, we had to fingerprint all our juveniles.
Oh
What a
yeah,
pain in.
pictures and prints. Yep.
So then as an officer, and then later as a sergeant, my officers would call it, Sarge, I got a 39 prisoner. Okay, what's it for? Can you sign the arrest form? Yes, I'll be right there. When it was still paper, right? Now,
Sure.
now it's all electronic. And boom, straight to the jail. Um, my second episode of my podcast, I had my buddy Tom Gilligan on, who was an NYPD cop for 7 years before, or 6 years before coming to us in 1990. And I wanted to get into the way NYPD did stuff when he was working as opposed to the way we do stuff. And when you got a prisoner in NYPD, you had this whole long process. You had to take him to the desk. The
Oh, I
sergeant
know.
had to
It's a
sign him.
rigmarole. Holy
Oh,
shit.
and you had to take him maybe for the arraignment. You had to
Yeah.
stay with him. It's crazy, right? We don't do
Yep.
that, And I actually had one of our officers, the girlfriend, she's a sergeant, girlfriend of my son's best friend on the job. They're all sergeants. And she saw the podcast and what Tommy was talking about the booking process for them, and then she wrote in the text back to our group. I will never complain about the way that we had to do it. After I saw what NYPD had to do.
Oh yeah. It's just a
It's insane.
yeah, it makes no sense to me whatsoever because I've had more than one NYPD copper on my show, and I'm like, my jaw's on the ground. You had to do what? No,
Yep.
you're married to that prisoner for like 8 to 10, 12 hours. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, hell no. No, 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 no. Absolutely not. But yeah, I always found that interesting. But let's talk about the beginning for you. What year did you come out of the police department?
83.
Okay, so you came to Miami during a population boom, and with that comes a boom in crime. I mean, you were around with cocaine cowboys, the Mariel
Yes.
boat lift, 125,000 Cubans washed ashore in one day. What was going through your mind as a new cop with all of this going on? Or was
Well,
it just business as usual?
the boat lift started before I started.
Okay,
And of course, we had the 1980 riots where several members of my department, none of which I ever worked with, beat a motorcyclist to death. And they were acquitted on the charges. It's called, and then the riots were called the McDuffie riots in
okay,
1980. And then a little bit middle of 80, I think it was May. I don't quote me on when the boat lift started, but that's when the boat lift started. And then Miami exploded, and it exploded with population, exploded with general crime, and then of course the drugs. So us, Metro-Dade and City of Miami had to start hiring really fast to keep up with the crime because everything was exploding. Um, I always, I love talking about the movie Scarface.
yeah,
So, for those that have seen the movie Scarface, and most of us have, the scene where you see Tony Montana and his guys walking into the bank with duffel bags full of cash, that's the way it was.
wow.
And The area that I worked at the time, our Southwest district, it's a middle class area, but a lot of drug dealers lived in that area because they could build nice houses or get a little piece of property, and then of course the telltale sign. It's commonplace now, but anybody that had surveillance cameras back then, doper, right?
Okay.
The run of the mill person didn't have surveillance cameras because it was very expensive. Now you can get little cameras that cost you $50, right?
Yeah, they were very conspicuous back then. Yeah.
Big time, and they're this big and
Right,
all
right.
over the compound, and but many of the drug related murders were happening in and around our district. And I can tell you, Patrick, that all of us that work Station 5, South District, just south of us, Station 4, um, Sarge, get on the radio. Sarge, I got another one, another dead body. And they're all drug related hits. We were finding them every single day. And it got so bad that our department and then the city of Miami had to expand their homicide units. And we created Centac 26, which was a specialized part of our homicide bureau just to handle the drug related murders
Wow.
because it was so prevalent. And everything just exploded. You could not go anywhere, number one, without having cocaine at a party. Everybody was doing it. It was all over the place. And when I was working plain clothes, one day, one set of weeks, we were working driveway robbers.
Okay.
So the folks that were going, before it became Macy's, it was Bert, and then you had Neiman Marcus, and I forget the other high-end stores at a couple of our malls. The bad guys would follow them in their nice cars and then rob them in their driveways.
Ah,
So our
sure.
plainclothes team was assigned to do surveillances in the area where they were getting hit. And my partner and I, one night, we're 8 o'clock one night, we're driving down this ritzy neighborhood, huge, lots of money in this neighborhood. The house itself wasn't anything great, but it was just a really nice neighborhood. We found two guys at the front door looking in the window. I drove down, I turned around, they were gone. Okay, something's fishy here. We set up a surveillance. We finally went and knocked on the door. Ipso facto, we got in the house, got a consent to search. The two bad guys were in the house that the wife was telling us they weren't there, while my partner and I are looking at them in the back, through the glass doors, right? And she's telling our guys at the front door, no, nobody's here. Okay. We found 1,000,003 in cash in a garbage bag, and Mac 11 machine guns. You know the cylindrical tanks used for oxygen or acetylene
Yeah,
torches and
yeah.
things like that. We found those because that's what was used to drop from the planes, to drop the drugs from the planes,
Oh, okay.
and luggage with coffee grounds in it because at the time
To
that's
try and
what
throw
we
off the
throw off the
dogs. Yeah.
dogs, right?
Yeah.
And then we found the 208 keys of coke in the attic.
Is
And
so
yeah,
you're on the phone going, "Hey, guess what I got?" Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of people interested in all of that.
well, there was a district plainclothes squad, crime suppression team, CST as we call it. And we did street level narcotics, but we
Sure.
weren't the narcotics bureau, right? So when we found this, okay, it's time to call narcotics and get
Oh yeah.
them in. And then we found a ledger book, and our narcotics sent it to the DEA, and they broke the code. And the code had them going from a real estate office in Miami to Milan, Italy, to Colombia, back to Miami. And the family, a husband, a wife, and three kids, were living in the house where they were funneling all the drugs and transactions to make it look like they were just living in the neighborhood. The 208 keys at that time was the largest seizure in Dade County history. Well, as we know, we've had tonnage since then.
Right.
It just exploded over the decades, and you get a container full coming into Port of Miami, with full of drug, cocaine or marijuana. So yes, it was a crazy time. But Patrick, I got to tell you, and I always say this, it was a fun time.
Yeah.
You learned how to be a cop.
Yep.
You had a lot of fun doing it. It was action all the time. Um, Never a dull moment. And we
Yeah. See,
were
I
like that.
started I started in 95 in arguably the worst part of the city, working midnight to 8, and every night was a shooting and or homicide. Every night. We
Yeah,
call it the crack wars. And it's the same thing. It's like one crack dealer is killing another crack dealer. There's a crack dealer that rips somebody off. They're selling ivory soap or, drywall as crack. Well, that'll earn you a bullet in your head.
sure.
And I just thought it was normal. I talked to other friends and they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. I mean, you expected that. You were in chases every night. There was dead bodies every night. I mean, at that time, our homicide rate was about 250, 260, somewhere in that ballpark, and well over 1,000, non-fatal shootings every year.
Yeah.
So you just got used to it.
And,
But
and when you're out there handling the scene, what do you do? Basically, it's like, okay, let me get my cup of coffee. We're going to be here for a while.
right,
And
I don't know. I, the way I looked at it was, this is normal. And eventually, I promoted, I went to a different district, and it was still going on, but not at the same tempo. So if it wasn't going on, I was kind of bored, but it was a great way to cut your teeth. You knew
yeah,
right away. It was like, yeah, this is for me. This is, there were some nights I'm like, they're paying me to do this. I would do it for free. This is awesome.
I think we all felt like that at some point early on in our careers. And even later in my career, with a specialized squad that I had at our intercoastal district when we worked overtime in the afternoon with the other detectives and the crime suppression team. I had a door kicker squad looking for the bad guys for the detectives. So we were quasi uniform, polo shirts, cargo pants, and then the tactical carrier on the outside, right?
Yeah.
And when our lieutenant said, "Okay, we're going to do an overtime detail today. Everybody's working 3 to 11," and I normally worked 7 to 3. I'm driving around at 7, 8, 9 in the evening, and I'm going, was my favorite shift, afternoons. I don't want to go home. I was back in the 80s, right? It transported me back, that feeling of this is great. I love this. And even, in my 50s, I say, oh God, I'm having such a good time with the squad and these guys and stuff. And then, then it comes to an end and then you got to
Yep.
move on.
Absolutely. Now, reading your book, one thing that I found interesting, well, I found a lot of stuff interesting, was you had a difference between Cuban and Colombian drug dealers. What was the difference?
So the Cuban drug dealers looked at it as just a business, and the family was kept separate from it. So Cuban rips off Cuban. They go after each other. They don't go after the family. When you have the Colombians involved, they whack everybody. They go after the family, the drug dealer that ripped them off, and they make examples out of them. We handled the homicide near one of our schools where they did the home invasion, right? First pose as cops and break in. And what they did is they killed the wife on the couch in front of the guy and left him alive to send a message to everybody else that was involved, right? And this was the norm. So that's the biggest difference between the Colombians and the Cubans. They really kept the family out of it, but not the Colombians. They were ruthless, bloodthirsty, and we had a lot of brutal killings. And then, of course, you've heard of the Colombian necktie,
Right.
right? So Cubans didn't do that. You have a whacked out Cuban once in a while that, went off the deep end, but it wasn't their MO. They didn't work that way. They just wanted to do the deals, make the money, live their lives, and have their families. Um, and then later on came the Jamaicans. And the Jamaicans were just as, or sometimes more ruthless than the Colombians. And as time went on, and then we got the Russians.
Okay.
And there's a section of Miami-Dade County in the Northeast that is, very Russian. The Russian mob works out of there. They're very low profile, but if you rip them off, they're going to make a very public example out of you. And now we have the Mexicans that are more ruthless than all of them combined. It's just gotten so much worse. But that going back to the 80s, the time of the cocaine cowboys and stuff, it was Cubans and Colombians, and that's the way they worked.
Gotcha. Now, going back to that giant seizure that you had, with that like husband, wife, and kids, whatever. What kind of time did they spend in prison, or do you remember?
Now, I would say that the family themselves, the husband and wife, probably didn't spend all that much time,
Okay.
because then it gets turned over federally.
Right, right.
Federal time is a little different than state time, and you've got to do about every minute of federal time. There's
Yes,
no out for good behavior and all early out and all that stuff.
correct.
So I really don't remember how much time they did, but
Were they able
I'm
to trace it? There was that trail that went to Italy, and then back,
yeah.
et cetera. Were they able to get some like big fish out of that?
So I'm sure and you would agree. Once our narcotics turned it over to the DEA, bye bye Metro Dade.
Oh yeah,
You're out.
absolutely. You're done.
So we never really heard anything after that.
Okay.
Once the feds take it, they like, thank you very much, and then we're going to take the credit from here on out.
Oh yeah. But then it's on to the next. Then there's some new, catastrophe the next day,
Right.
or some new thing. It just, people are like, hey, what's the biggest, or the most memorable? I said, it all kind of melded into one because
Yeah.
you're constantly going from one thing to the next. I was a street sergeant the entirety of my career, and I thought that was the best job on the department, hands down. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
But one of the negatives was, and I didn't really care at the time, was, well, whatever happened with them, like, I don't care. On to the next, on to the next, on to the next. That's I don't know. That's the way I saw it.
I, other than the time in plain clothes, I did spend 3.5 years in headquarters and crime scene, but I was what I call in the dungeon of crime scene at the forensic imaging unit. So we were responsible for all the mug shots
Mm,
for all of Miami-Dade County in its entirety. I had two clerks, three forensic photographers, and two forensic artists, the ones that do the sketches.
yeah,
And they're all civilian, great people. I had that for 3.5 years. And then I finally said, you know what? I feel like a tiger in a cage. I need to get out of here and
yeah,
go back to the street. And I asked for a transfer. And that's how I ended up in our intercoastal district for 7 years before I finished my career at the airport.
sure, sure.
And I loved being on the street. I was part of a group. We taught mobile field force, crowd control. I did that for 18 years. And then for many years, we taught major scene management for supervisors. So we were doing, first we started with the tabletop and moving the
Yep.
little police cars and helicopters around. And then we got a projector. Well, we thought, okay, oh, we're pretty sophisticated now until we got the smart board. And we got money to do the smart board and make a studio basically, right, to
Right,
teach sergeants and lieutenants. And that was a lot of fun. So I liked the action of the street, that you don't know what you're going to from one moment to the
right.
next. I loved
Absolutely.
that, right? And even though at one time I applied for homicide early in my career, by the time they got to my interview, the sergeant called me and said, "Hey, we're going to do your interview now. All right, we're going to set you up." I go, "Thanks, but no thanks. My son was born a month ago, so I'm not going to go to homicide where I'm going to live for the next 5 years,
Yes.
right? Because you don't go home."
No, you don't. That's one thing about homicide. I remember I was with a detective. I had a homicide. I had the guy was shot, but he wasn't dead. So we don't send homicide detectives unless they're dead. So I had like we call them violent crime detectives. I had the scene, and we're just chit chatting. And I said, I remember when you were on homicide. And he says, yeah. He said, you know what? I had the coolest boat on the block. I had the nicest car, and I never had the opportunity to use any of it. And my kids hate me. My wife hate me. I wound up getting divorced because I never saw them.
In the homicide SOP for Miami-Dade, it says you are going to experience times of inflated salary. Live within your means and don't rely on the overtime.
Right.
What you just said, a lot of guys made the mistake. They got the bigger house, they got the boat or the new
Yep.
truck or whatever it was. And then you know what you ended up buying? Extra shirts and ties and razor kits to take with you to work.
Right.
That's where you were going to live.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I didn't want to do that.
No, no, that's no way to live. Somebody's got to do it, but no thanks.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about like when you first started, the there's a huge surge in crime. The population is going crazy. What were the growing pains for the department during all that?
Trying to get people through the academy. I was part of that. I was part of the growing pains. I got hired in 7 months. My brother, who came out of the Army 2 years later, got hired in 5 months. That was unheard of
Yeah, it took
before.
me 4 years.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And, and after the big boom of the 80s and into the early 90s, it slowed down. One of my colleagues, he's a sergeant still on the job, he's a couple of years away. He actually was one of my officers at the port of Miami. And then he got promoted, later on. Tony, and unfortunately, this is part of the game, especially here. He's an Anglo male put over here, and it took him a year and a half or so to get hired,
right.
almost 2 years. So that's a long time for us, not the 4 years, fortunately. But at the time, with the population blowing up, with the Cuban influx, they needed Spanish speaking
Mm,
officers more than anything.
makes sense. Yeah.
So did the city of Miami. So, all right, I am not Cuban. I am of Argentinian descent. I was born here. My whole family is, but my parents are from Argentina. Almost all the rest of my colleagues are Cuban born or Cuban descent.
Mm,
So I did speak Spanish, but I didn't speak as fluently as all the other guys. But because my last name is Gonzalez and I didn't have, a checkered past, I mean, I was only, 22 when I applied, right?
right.
I was a lifeguard, my first job at 17. I was a day camp counselor when I graduated high school. I was a security guard when I moved to Miami because I grew up in New York State. And then I worked for a small credit and color. Oh, sorry. Um, Eckerd Drugs, which is like CVS.
Yeah.
It was a Florida-based drugstore. And then I went to a small credit and collections firm. So didn't have two nickels to rub together. Didn't really have, anything in my past. Got hired. My brother, the same thing. 4 years in the Army, even better. Got hired right away. And our hiring standards were very, very strict. On one of our recruiting posters, like you see the badge on my book, that is from the recruiting poster, wear the silver badge. It was a big thing back in the early 80s. And then
Yeah.
there was another one that said only 1 in 14 is good enough to wear the silver badge. So we really vetted our candidates strictly, right? City of Miami, on the other hand, wasn't doing it quite so thoroughly.
Okay.
And they hired a lot of former gang members that,
Oh, God.
teenagers. And now I know you've heard of the Miami River cops.
Yes.
Okay, back in 80, 85, 86. Well, these were guys that were former gangbangers that made it through the system, didn't get vetted out, and ended up ripping off and killing drug dealers on the Miami River.
Yep.
We had one slip through once in a while, and we've got our bad apples like every agency does, especially large agencies. But that was part of the problem, is that we had to grow and grow and grow to keep up with everything. And the regular population of Miami-Dade County, or back Dade County, we were expanding west and south. So the houses were getting built and apartments were getting built and just growing and growing and growing. Because why would the commissioners approve so much? Well, it increases the tax base.
Yeah, sure. Money. Yeah.
Okay, exactly. It's always money. And for years and years and years, we were hiring. When I started the academy, which was at Miami-Dade College North Campus, is where the Southeast Institute of Criminal Justice, Southeast Florida Institute of Criminal Justice is. Later on in the late 90s, we started our own academy, and the city of Miami started their own. But all the other agencies within Dade County send their cadets to Miami-Dade College for training. There were 6 academy classes going when my class entered. So it was one after the other, after the
Yeah.
other, after the other for years. So when the big push started, BLE, basic law enforcement class, one, that was the late 70s when they started numbering them. In 83, I was 80, class 84.
Wow.
So it was just one after the other,
Yeah.
after the other, after the other. We never stopped, and City of Miami was doing the same thing as well. They're not as big as we are. Um, and it, and let me qualify that statement. So Miami-Dade Police, Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office is the largest department in Southeast United States, all based on population. You guys in the north and the northeast, you've got bigger cities, so you got to have more, many more cops. But Miami-Dade County is also a huge county. It's very spread out, so you got a lot of ground to cover. And we don't really have beats. City of Miami does.
Mm.
Miami Beach does because they have small square blocks.
Yeah.
The tourist areas of Miami Beach, and then the business areas in downtown Miami. But everything else is patrol car, and especially for us, you got vast distances in most of our districts that you have to cover. Our South District, where my son works now, is actually bigger than the state of Rhode Island. And you get out into the Everglades, you get down to Monroe County when you start entering into the famous Florida Keys. It's huge. And if you're in trouble and you're way down in the migrant camps, as we call it, in the very southwest corner of South District, it is very far away. And if you need emergency backup, you're in trouble.
Wow.
So anytime there's a big thing that goes out there, they send multiple cars. They never just send, one or two
Okay.
cars. They
Sure.
got to send a bunch of cars. Yeah.
That makes sense. So
So,
tell me about the airdrops of drugs coming into Florida when you were working. You were talking about like those canisters for like
yeah.
oxygen or acetylene torches. What did that look like?
Well, here we have the Florida Everglades, and it's very hard to navigate the Everglades. You have to be on an airboat. My old partner, who's deceased now, Mal, he was part of Ducks Unlimited, and it was a
Oh,
big,
sure.
yeah. But here they had airboats because they all went hunting out in the Everglades, you know. And the drug dealers would come in low, below any radar that the feds would probably have, and they would drop those containers in. But the guys knew when they were coming in; it was all coordinated, and they would go in and they would pick them up. And then that's how they ended up in that house, in that one particular house out of thousands.
Yeah.
Uh, that's how they transport the drugs. And bales of marijuana would be airdropped as well. They're all tied up, so then they're really not going to break apart. The planes are flying low, and they drop them. Or if you have, a small airstrip someplace, just like you see in the movies, right? We've seen that depicted in cinema time and time again. These remote airstrips where they come in, they drop the stuff, and then they go. The Everglades is perfect for that. The Everglades is also perfect for disposing of bodies that you don't want anybody to find.
That was my next question. How much time did you spend in the Everglades,
We
with
didn't
these
spend a
invest?
lot because you just can't get out there. If someone, one of the like Miccosukee Indian Reservation out there, and they're the ones that along the Tamiami Trail, the famous Tamiami Trail that cuts across Florida to Naples. They have airboat rides, and you can do all that and see them wrestle alligators that are half drugged up anyway. That's all BS, But um, if they were to find a body out there, then they would call, and then you'd have to make arrangements to get out there. You just can't, you got to do it on an airboat. We don't have airboats.
Right.
You gotta hire or commandeer one or ask pretty please to somebody who has one, or maybe the Miccosukee Indians, and take us out. So you got to take multiple airboats, homicide detectives, crime scene, eventually the medical examiner people to retrieve the
Yeah.
body. And when uh, Value Jet went down in the Everglades, went down like this and buried inside the Everglades, into the ground, into the mud and everything.
Oh,
My brother, who was working crime scene, he was one of the ones chosen. The feds gave them dry suits to wear, and they
yeah.
had to go in and pick up the body parts.
Ugh.
right? And but you have to be ferried out there to get to these places. I mean, we
Right.
had a whole command post out there with police, fire, tents, logistics, you name it. And not only they had to recover the bodies of the people who were on board, you got to recover the airplane parts
Oh
to the
yeah,
NTSB.
absolutely. Yep.
So it was drawn, long investigation. It takes time, but the Everglades makes it so difficult to do anything because it's just swamp.
Well, if I was a bad guy and I wanted to get rid of a person, I would think the Everglades would be ideal because wouldn't a gator just munch them up? That would be the end of them.
I had someone else ask me on a podcast that I guested on, and he was asking me the same
Yeah,
question. And I said, gators don't care what they eat.
right.
Okay, your protein, you're going to get eaten. Um, I know that sound to the untrained ear, maybe outside of law enforcement or fire, people will go, "Oh, how can he say something like that?" Well, okay, we have gallows humor, and we have to apply humor to everything that we handle. But yes, gators will eat anything. Gators have gotten rid of many people. And then we have the Atlantic Ocean on our east side. Okay, so people get dumped out there. So take your pick. You know,
Sure.
the Everglades is easier to go because you can go down the Tamiami Trail in the middle of the night. No one's going to see you because there's almost no traffic at that time, especially. And you dump somebody off the side of the road into the swamp, and there's gators everywhere.
Yeah, I think of Dexter, the TV show Dexter, where he had a whole bunch of bodies that he. I don't think it was the Glades; it was in the ocean, right?
Probably, yeah, because he had a boat. I remember him having a boat.
Yeah, he had a boat.
Long,
He
there
had a
were
nice.
apartments along the Intracoastal in Miami Beach where I saw that he did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, so it wouldn't be too hard to get rid of somebody, that's for sure.
Oh, no, it's
So
not.
was that one seizure your biggest that we're talking about, at the top of the show there? Was that your
That
biggest
was
like drug or money seizure?
the biggest that my guy, the team I was part of with
Yeah.
our sergeant, all the officers at the time. 208 keys was a big deal. It really was. And counting the 1,300,000, you had to go back to narcotics where the counting machines, and put it through the counting machines multiple times to make sure you have the right count. And then you
Right.
do it as a group, right? Not just one officer does it. You do it as a group because, we don't want anything missing.
Sure.
Um, Later on, that 208 kilos was dwarfed by
Sure.
the seizures that narcotics or the DEA was
Oh, it's
making.
tons and tons. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
in customs,
Yeah.
customs at the Port of Miami. I was assigned at the Port of Miami. We took over in April of 2002 from the National Guard when it reverted back to us, and we had to rewrite all the security protocols.
Yeah. What was that like working at the Port of Miami? I was going to ask you about that.
Very, very interesting. It's a unique place, but customs was king on the port before 9/11, and we had a very small footprint on the port, Miami-Dade Police. When we went back and took over again, now because of the new state laws governing the deep water ports in the state of Florida, 31112, we had to rewrite the entire security plan and bring the cruise companies and the cargo companies and all the employees on the port into compliance with all these new security regulations. It was a bear.
Okay.
Nobody wants to do real security. They don't want to make money. They want to, just look the other way and have everything run smoothly. It was a very stressful time, but it was a very interesting time. And now Miami-Dade Police was the chief law enforcement agency on the port. So we had to learn to work with customs. We didn't work really together before, but
Yeah.
fortunately, the group that we had on the port and the main group of the customs officers, we started, we had meetings all the time. We were working really well together. There was one small group of ICE guys, and I won't say the guy's name, the lead agent. He didn't like us. He didn't think we were real cops.
Okay.
And they would come in and bust through the gates into the secure area where the cargo areas with all the containers and everything and the cargo ships. And then we get a call of an unmarked car. We have to chase them down, and it turns out, it's these ICE guys.
Uh,
And this has nothing to do with ICE in its present form,
right.
that's on. And he and I almost came to fisticuffs. I said, Why don't you just tell us you're coming in? We have the description of your car. So when they call us, we already know it's you instead of blowing your cover,
Sure,
right?
sure.
We have to chase down the possible threat. The thing about the port and the airport, it isn't just run of the mill police work, it's homeland security.
Right,
So
right.
you have federal laws that govern all this. And in order to get into secure areas, you have to have a federal ID, like at the airport. So learning the way a port works and bringing everybody into compliance was very difficult. And then what we had to do, because the regulations became so strict, we had to train hundreds of our officers from around the department to be able to come work overtime at the port
Oh,
because we
okay.
had all these posts that we had to man now. We
Mm,
didn't just have 5 guys on the port patrolling. We had all these checkpoints that we were responsible for now. And one of the things you need to learn about a port, especially in the cargo area, it's a very dangerous work environment. You see the machines that pick up the containers
yeah,
and
you
drive
bet.
around
Yep,
the top loaders, right?
yep.
And then you've got the gantry cranes that are actually loading on the ship. Cardinal rule is never drive under a container,
Yeah, okay.
right? And we had a video of a hatch from the cargo ships that they lift off, put on the dock, so they can put containers inside the hold of the cargo ship before they start stacking them up the deck, off the deck. They actually created a video of dropping one of those cargo hatches on a car,
Ooh,
and this was for training purposes.
right.
So the training that I did, the 2 blocks that I was responsible for, I had that video in my training block to tell all the new guys that are going to come work overtime with us. You see this? Do not drive under a container, right? Because the medical examiner's office is going to have a hell of a time scraping you out of there.
Right, right.
But there's a lot of moving parts. It's very interesting when the cruise ships come back from a cruise. Now, customs takes over for that because they got to clear everybody because you went out into international waters.
Sure.
So it's just like going to Europe and coming back. I have to say this, and maybe I'm going to upset a few people that may see this or something, but we had to deal with the longshoremen, the International Longshoremen's Association. In my opinion, they're a criminal organization.
Okay.
They know where all the stuff's going on. They're dealing drugs out of there and stolen cars and a whole bunch of stuff. And customs only inspects about 3% of the containers that
Mm,
come into the port. And then because of 9/11, eventually radiation monitors, portals had to be installed for
mm,
any nuclear devices coming in the port. All the ports
sure.
have had to do this. So it's a great learning environment. Well, I mentioned Tony, who's my was one of my officers at the port. He and the other Tony were the first 2 explosive canine officers at the port of Miami ever. I had them
Wow.
both on my squad on day shift. So they got trained by a very close friend of mine who was a canine trainer to train them to work the dogs and all the explosives training and all that. So then when you get just like at the airport, if you get a piece of luggage that's left laying someplace,
Sure.
you got to look at that as a threat. So the
Absolutely.
easiest thing to do is call one of the dogs and have them sweep it. For people that don't know, when the dog hits on something, whether it's a drug dog, a gun dog, or an explosives dog, they sit down.
Right.
You don't do this,
Yeah.
because you could blow something up, right?
You're right.
So if the dog sits, run the other way, right? And then you got to make a perimeter and clear everybody out. We've had that happen a few times, and we've had it happen at the airport as well. There's a whole platoon of explosive dogs at the airport.
Sure.
Um, and to watch them work, and then they have their real explosives out in the middle of the airfield, what we call the penalty box, where a compromised aircraft that could have an explosive device on it, or where Air Force One parks when the president comes in. It's out in the middle of the airfield. Nobody can get to it unless you're authorized to drive out there. But they have a bunker where they keep real explosives so they can work the dogs.
Sure. Makes
Got to
sense.
constantly work the dogs to remind them, you're a bomb dog. You need to smell this stuff, right?
Right.
Customs is the one in the airport with the drug dogs.
Okay.
to get you coming back in, and also at the seaport. So very similar environments, ships, planes, passengers, and then you got cargo, at the port,
Yeah.
which is very interesting and
What
dangerous. Going on a
was
cargo ship is very dangerous.
was there TSA at the port?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how strictly or how well managed or how specific were they as far as searching people coming on and off cruise ships? How diligent, I guess that's the best
Well,
way.
coming off the cruise ships, that's customs job, but
Okay.
going on the cruise ships, that's TSA's job,
Okay.
right? Just like at the airport.
You're right.
And you would get screened. Your body would get screened, your luggage would get screened, and then of course, you'd find all kinds of odds and ends inside luggage. One of the big things with the cruise ships is you can't bring your own liquor on board because they want you to buy their
Oh,
liquor,
absolutely, yes.
right? Buy the package for their
Yeah.
liquor sales. And funny, I won't say what it is without saying what it is, but if you have something vibrating inside a piece of luggage, you can only imagine what that is, right?
Yeah.
And customs, or TSA would find, they have to open it up and say, what's vibrating in there? Or they see something on an image in the X-ray, just like at the airport. And the individual, usually female, is a little bit embarrassed when they open up the luggage and find whatever they find that's vibrating. But it's the same process.
Okay.
Every once in a while, you got a knucklehead that packed a firearm.
Sure. Sure.
Happens at the airport all the time. My guys would get called. We got a firearm at the checkpoint, one of the checkpoints, and you're going to jail today. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Oh, I forgot it was in there. No, no, no. You're going to arrest. You're going to get arrested, and then Homeland Security comes out, and they start with a $3,800 fine.
Ugh.
Start with the $3,800 fine. Okay, so you're going to end up paying that unless a judge says otherwise. But you're taking the ride today at the Dade County Jail. So similar environments. The port, a little bit different because it's cruise ships and everybody's there. Oh, they're going to go have a good time and they're going to
Right,
eat,
right.
drink, and all that.
But
But they get
I've seen video. I've never been on a cruise, but I've seen, like say Carnival. Yeah, there's people smoking dope left and right on those boats.
so. I have to say, my port experience. So all the guys, all of us that ended up going to the port after 9/11, you have Carnival, as you mentioned. You got Celebrity. We had the Norway that the boilers actually blew up the morning I was working overtime,
Oh
and we
shit.
had 9 crew members killed and
Oh my
27
gosh.
injured. Yeah, the SS Norway, um, which was part of the Royal Caribbean. You got Royal
Mm.
Caribbean, you got Norwegian. So those of us that worked the port had come up with a nickname for Carnival. And I'm going to upset some people, but you know what? You got to wear it. The Jerry Springer of the cruise lines.
Yeah, I could see that.
So all the videos you're seeing lately, it's absolutely true. And now Carnival is cracking down
Now,
because they're
how
the cheapest of the cruise lines.
right, but how could they get are they just picking up when they go to the port? Like, say, yeah, we're going to Jamaica. Well, it's not too hard to get some devil's lettuce there. Is that what's going on? They're not bringing it on the
Well,
ship from
no, no,
Miami.
no. You know what? Because you can sneak it on. Let's face it. If you have it contained in something else that only looks like a vitamin bottle or something like that. But then if you have a port of call, because all the cruise ships go to these different
Yeah,
ports, the Bahamas and
absolutely.
everything. Yeah, you're going to get it. And then getting screened coming back on board, you're really getting screened for weapons.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, and it's a different because the ship is doing the screening.
Ah, okay.
How much confidence I have in that? Well,
Yeah, very
not
little
much.
for yeah, right,
Right.
right.
Because if they tell you 4 o'clock, you need to be back on board so we can go, go back out and go to our next port of call, they want to get going. They don't want to get behind on their schedule.
Right, right,
Okay. And then, oh, somebody's running late or whatever, and they're getting them on board and they're not checking anything.
right. Oh boy. So reading your book, The Real Greatest Show on Earth, yeah, you talked a bit about ego in the job. how to keep it in check and how it could help or hurt you. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as you well know, Patrick, as cops, we all have egos.
Oh,
We need the ego to do our jobs. We have to be that alpha dog that takes control of all the situations that we're involved in, which is basically almost every one, especially something of an exigent or emergency circumstance. We have to be in charge. So you've got to project that. And we have great authority. Everybody knows that. A cop has great authority in this country, all the way up to taking somebody's life. But as you and I know, sometimes the ego gets a little out of control, especially when you start going up the ladder, start getting promoted. And I truly believe that if you were an asshole as a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain, you were already an asshole as an officer. It just came out now
right.
because now you're over other people. What I try to tell young officers when I was working, of course, and all the training and mentoring that I did is you have to understand that you don't know everything. And when you're an officer, you're basically responsible for yourself. When you get promoted, now you're responsible for a group of officers. And now you're a lion tamer because you probably have a group of alpha dogs, alpha
Yep.
lions, and now you have to become the lion tamer and manage all those personalities and everything. Lieutenant was a platoon lieutenant. A platoon lieutenant now has, 4 or 5 sergeants that he or she is in charge of. And you're now you got to manage supervisors. The captain has to manage all the lieutenants, the way our structure, our command
Yeah,
structure
same where
works.
I worked. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen, I've had fantastic, great supervisors. I wrote about one of them specifically in the book, Sergeant Jim Slack Pappy, that squad that gave me
Yeah.
Maverick.
Yep.
He was known as Pappy, like Pappy Boyington from the Black Sheep, because the squad was known as the Black Sheep. Not that they were bad; they were all great cops and real great FTOs. And then I listed all the other supervisors I had at the end of that chapter that were fantastic supervisors, both sergeant and lieutenant, and a couple captains and majors. But we have those that abuse their authority and make a project out of you because they can, and then they ride you and they pick on you all the time. And I never liked it when a sergeant or a lieutenant talked down to one of their subordinates, especially in a public way.
Right. Right.
You're handling an exigent circumstance, bark out orders. I want you to take that perimeter point. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. That's fine, right? That's part of the job. But when someone screws up and you need to correct that behavior, are you looking for correction or are you looking for humiliation? And I've seen it too many times where supervisors humiliate their subordinates at every
Yeah.
level. I hate the saying, you work for me. No, I don't. I work for the citizens of Dade County, both tax-paying and non-tax-paying. I am responsible to you when I was an officer to my sergeant or when as a sergeant to my lieutenant, etc. But I don't work for you. You supervise me and are responsible for me. You don't pay my salary. As I wrote in the book in one of the op-eds that I wrote, you start your own business, fine. You can say you work for me all day long if it'll make you feel better. That's part of the ego problem that we have. Fire has it, the military has it, and of course, corporate America has it when managers at different levels.
Right.
Just like my wife worked in a hospital, doctors that get full of themselves and they talk down to their staff. No,
Sure.
I don't subscribe to that. And that was one of my problems is I always pushed back, even as a young officer when I saw that I didn't like it. And when I became a sergeant, following Pappy's example, when you said Sergeant Maverick was once somebody you aspired to. My friends and I aspired to be Jim Slack.
Okay.
And that's the guy that I tried to emulate, along with a bunch of others. I've had other great
Right.
super.
Yep. Yep.
Charles Nanny, who ended up retiring from us as a division chief. He's now assistant chief at South Miami Police. And coincidentally, he's getting Florida Law Enforcement Hall of Fame.
Oh, cool.
Great, great cop. And he was my supervisor as my very first squad in Northside District after I got promoted. Nanny was my lieutenant on afternoons. And like I wrote in the book, when you're a new sergeant, you meet with your new lieutenant for the first time. That supervisor subordinate talk, just like
Yep.
when you're a sergeant, you get your first squad, you have the talk. Nanny and I had the talk when I first went to his platoon. You know what he said to me? He goes, I heard you're a good cop. And I said, I heard you're a good cop. He shook my hand. He goes, welcome. And that was our talk. And he
Okay.
let me do my thing. I was already 15 years on the job, so I wasn't
Sure.
wet behind the ears to begin with. But he knew that I already came with some pedigree, that I did my job well, and now I'm a sergeant. And he let me just be me. And then I would keep him informed. Hey, LT, I think you need to come out for this one. Another time, I just inform him, no, you don't need to come out. This is not a big deal, you know. And that's the way I always worked as a sergeant. I always kept my lieutenant, informed. Just like when I was an officer, our job was to make the sergeant look good.
Yep.
If the sergeant was an asshole, well, you know,
I understand.
yeah, exactly.
So, did you guys have Comstat back then?
Yes.
Boy, talking about egos and trying to make somebody look bad, that is just a white hot spotlight for us. We called it Stump the Dummy. And it just, if you had a climber that just, oh man, they wanted command staff so bad, they would just bulldoze over anybody, any opportunity to make you look bad and them look good. Oh God, it was horrible.
I was lucky as mostly a uniformed sergeant that I wasn't in a specialized unit that I had to provide stats at a CompStat meeting, right? Like you said earlier, when you're working the road, at the end of the shift, you're done. You don't have to follow up on anything and none of that. But CompStat was a very sore spot because then you get the reports the following week, and then they would say, we're higher on auto thefts, we're higher on burglaries, or whatever the case is. Okay. And you would, maybe enhance patrols in a certain area that spiked or something like that. But it's a red ant hill theory. I have a red ant hill over here. I put the granules around the red ant hill to kill that particular mound. Well, what do? They move over here.
Yeah,
Now I got to put it on over here, and then they move over here. And that's crime, right? You're
right.
never going to stamp it out. You can deter it by presence and enhanced patrols, and then doing some special details and maybe unmarked cars and catching some bad guys, which of course we've all done. Every police department has done that. Um, but CompStat, we called it compost.
We call it something else, but I won't say what.
Okay. Um, at the end of October '03, we finished. Like I said, I was on the Mobile Field Force Training Committee. We trained for 4 months, 1,200 officers for the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas in November of '03. There's going to be a big free trade thing. We're going to have protesters coming
Yeah.
down the whole, everything you see around the country and around the world. But right after we finished the 4 months of training, I went to New York to spend a week with two NYPD buddies that I met down here. And Butch took me on a grand tour of NYPD. And we went to 1PP. And I went to the room where Comstat was born.
Oof.
And it has a gallery on each side,
Sure.
tables in the middle with a microphone, and then a big screen at the end. And this is where all the commanders are sitting and the precinct captain is giving their report. I was intimidated sitting in that room, right? And I was never going to appear in that room. I could feel the tension of them coming down on a precinct captain, flashing stuff on that screen, and then throwing the questions at him or her. And and we as we know, NYPD does things a little bit differently. They're pretty kind of regimented the way they do some things, and there's a lot of separation within that department between officers and detectives and all that
All
and
right.
supervisors.
Right. Yeah.
Um, But I felt the intimidation being in that room where it all started, and we never cared for it here. Unfortunately, I didn't have to go to many ComStat meetings
I didn't
because
have to
I
go
don't do
to
well with that.
I didn't have to go to many, but unfortunately, a couple times I got thrown under the bus, and my lieutenant's like, "Guess what you're doing next Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock?" I'm like, "Oh, come on, really?" It's like, "All right, fine, whatever." And
Right.
I made it through, but it's funny. A buddy of mine went the week before, and he said all this stuff. He wasn't told that there are certain things you couldn't say during Comstat, especially if the chief was there, and the chief was there. And he says, "Well, how come these auto thefts in your district are, blah, blah, blah?" I said, "Well, we can't chase cars anymore, sir." And his face just turns beet red because you couldn't mention the new pursuit policy, even though that was the reason why, but you couldn't say it out loud, or we don't have enough cops for that. Oh, you can't say that at Compstat. Can't do it.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it becomes a clown show, I think. Yeah, I think at its roots, it has some merit,
Yeah.
but it becomes bastardized and contorted and twisted into
Yes.
some bizarre ego thing for those egomaniacs, in command staff that, yeah, that's all I'll talk about it, but that it turns into a monster, I think.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
reading your book, The Real Greatest Show on Earth, you talked about sovereign citizens. Man, that brought back some memories because I've had some dealings with them, and it is a pain in the ass. No, nothing good comes from this. You know, and I'm thinking again, I'm having flashbacks. And if there's any cops out there that have to deal with this, my 2 cents worth is make sure you're very clear in saying you're under arrest. I'm going to break your car window and drag you out by your earlobes. You know, and I hope this is on tape. Make sure there's body cameras rolling, but say
Right.
you are under arrest. Just getting into a pissing match, going back and forth and back and forth. No, just don't, just do it or walk away. You got two choices.
That's their MO. They want to exasperate you into doing something where they think now they have a lawsuit or a complaint or something.
Right.
Right.
But my question was, any other cops give you any feedback from that? Because that really touched a nerve. I was just like, oh, hell yeah.
When I was in Intracoastal, where I had the dealings with this, I somehow, because my experience with crisis intervention team, where I was training officers to deal with the mentally ill, I kind of inherited the housing crisis with the squatters after the '08 crash.
Okay.
And I was dealing with all the squatter issues. I really started researching that. So how we can get squatters out. We just don't leave them in there. This is not your house. Excuse my French. Get the fuck out. You're done.
Right.
And then the sovereign citizens issue was coming up, and we were getting a lot more. So I got some training from a detective in I forget where she was working, but she was specializing in sovereign citizens. So I went to get more training so I could bring it back to my district. These guys, they're they can be really dangerous. Like this, the
Oh,
example I
yeah.
cite, in the book where the father and son killed the officers. Um, they are going to give you a hard time at every turn. They're not going to give you a license. What I learned is they're not driving, they're traveling. That's the way they say it, right? And they give you some stupid little piece of paper that says, I'm a
Yep.
traveler and I don't have to obey the laws, this and that. What I did find from the training I went through was that generally sovereign citizens only see the county sheriff as the true authority. They don't recognize the federal government
Mm,
whatsoever,
okay.
right? They don't pay their taxes and all that BS. Um, but dealing with them on the street, it's a very difficult time. And of course, you're trying not to get involved in a physical altercation because
Right.
you're going to yank this MF through the window, a police extrication at some point, right? And one of the examples I love, and I wrote about this, is one of the extra officers I hired for that specialized squad I had. She stopped a sovereign citizen. She was a rookie officer. She had no idea what to do, and she was completely intimidated by this past wipe. And they roll the window down this far and
Yep.
all that.
Yep.
Yes, right. So she gets on the radio, has me go to the talk frequency, and tells me, and I go, okay, I'm on my way. Mike from my squad, Big Mike, who's 6'5", Okay. Big, tall, black guy. The sovereign citizen was a black guy. Mike got on. He goes, Sarge, I'll take care of it. I said, okay, I'm going to start heading out, but I'll meet you there. He got to the car and he looked at the guy and he goes, listen, my sergeant is not going to play with you. You're told to give over your driver's license. You have to do it. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. That's the law. When he gets here, he's going to give you one chance to turn over your driver's license to the officer for the traffic violation. If you don't take that chance, we're going to break the window and yank your little ass out of the car, and then you're going to go to jail. And the guy did this and handed Mike the driver's license. I used Mike whenever I could because he was so big, to
Right.
intimidate people so we wouldn't get in a fight, right?
Absolutely.
I did the same at the airport with unruly passengers. I had Steve Weingrad on my squad, big guy, muscular, worked out all the time. He was just a couple of years younger than me, my generation. We never got in a fight because Steve intimidated everybody. So I used it to my advantage, right? All my guys that had strengths in certain areas, but Steve was the biggest, Mike was the biggest, put them up front, right? Let them talk to the person. Every once in a blue moon, then we might have to dance a little bit, but you are going to lose and go to the jail. First, go to the hospital.
Right.
So
Okay.
these people are dangerous, and you've got to expect with a sovereign citizen, like any bad guy, they're armed or they mean to do you harm at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about training. I know that's one of your jams. You've trained over 25,000 cops in your 38-year career. Why do it? And how vital is it in your mind?
25,000 more or less as part of these groups.
Yeah.
Okay. Not me personally. And I don't want to ever say I did that. No, no, no. I was always part of a group.
Okay.
So, mobile field force, for people that don't know the term, it's crowd control. And as soon as I got promoted in 98, I waited for the opening for my district to join the mobile field force training committee because I always enjoyed it. It's like you're playing soldier for a little bit, dressing up with all the gear and everything, and you're going out and handling crowds and stuff like that. So I always wanted to do it. And after the 1980 riots, the one we talked about earlier, the 80 riots here in Miami, Metro-Dade Police and City of Miami and all the other departments really had no organized way of addressing these riots. One of my FTOs, Al Goodall, my second FTO, told me, yeah, when we had the 80 riots, we all carried as many weapons as we could. We were four-man to a car. And we went down and we just shot back at everybody that was shooting at us, right? Okay, so both departments had to create an organized response to civil unrest. They didn't have it. Mobile Field Force was born. City of Miami actually coined the term, but Metro-Dade took it and ran with it and expounded it and expanded it and made it into the model that most departments around the country use today. And I wanted to be part of that. I'm second generation, maybe third of the instructors. And we took it and it's packaged really well. It's an organized form of meeting a crowd, basically like the Spartan phalanx.
Yeah.
And you never break that line. You never break that line. I'm seeing all these disturbances around the country, especially in 2020, all the summer of love. Individual fights with all the cops, officers and citizens and stuff, or protesters. You don't handle it that way.
No.
It doesn't work. And cops get hurt, people get hurt unnecessarily. So I was part of that group. And every year we saw about 2,000 of our officers. We did it every spring. So you can see where that number of
Okay.
25,000
Sure.
over
Sure. Sure.
15 years, grow, comes
Yeah.
out. So I did that. Very proud of the work that we did. And when we trained for the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas for November of 03, we took lessons from Seattle and Quebec, where Seattle got trashed. You remember in 99, they got destroyed. And the police chief ended up resigning over it because he didn't prepare his department. We're proud to say between us and the city of Miami and all the other municipalities that were with us, Florida Highway Patrol, Coral Gables, Hialeah, School Board Police, all the others, We lost one window in downtown Miami.
Wow.
That's it. We had a day where we engaged with gas and all that stuff. And fortunately, we really didn't get anybody hurt. We took a bunch of people to jail. But like usual, the state attorney's office just ends up letting them go, drops the charges because they don't want to deal with that.
Right.
So you make
Yeah.
80 or 100 arrests, nobody gets prosecuted for that.
No, of
So
course
that
not.
that that was the biggest training of my career. And then there was major scene management, where our director, Bobby Parker, went to one of our lieutenants, Raul Chewy Martinez. His nickname is Chewy because he kind of looked like Chewbacca. And he's got a master's in emergency management. And when he was my lieutenant in crime scene, he came to us on the field force committee, got a group of us because we're used to training masses of people. And we put together this training program to teach sergeants and lieutenants how to handle critical situations on the street because our supervision was very poor. They didn't know how to do it. And, when you got to create a box to perimeterize, contain. Active shooter, of course. We had scenarios for all these different things, putting sergeants and lieutenants on the spot in front of the smart board or that,
Sure.
the
The tabletop. Yeah.
tabletop with the radios and having to call out just like they were on the scene
Yep.
and put them under stress to handle all these different types of situations. We scripted as a committee, I don't know, dozens of scenarios, and then we recorded them all so you can play the audio and then put it on the smart board with the police cars and the helicopters, the fire trucks, doing the perimeters and all that kind of stuff. And that was very rewarding because at the beginning of the classes, the sergeants and lieutenants, and at the end of it, they go, "Oh my God, that was the best training."
Yeah. That is good
When you do
training.
it, when you do a really good tabletop, you
Yep.
learn from that,
Sure do.
right? And you go, "Wow, I didn't know that, or I didn't think of that." So I did that, and I was an FTO a couple times. I was a field training supervisor, and then I got into crisis intervention training. I mentored many officers and young sergeants, and I'm just proud of the work that me and all the guys have done. Right? I'm not alone in this. We're never alone in this, right?
Right.
And when you think that you know everything, like I said earlier, you don't. You can always learn something from somebody else. With my officers who worked different units that had strengths in those units, I would ask them, look, I never worked and I never wrote warrants and general investigations or something, but one of the guys did. I go, so how do you do this? I'm familiar with it, but I never actually did it.
Right. Right.
So okay, you're lead on this, handle it, right?
Yep.
And that's the way we did it. So training was a big part of my career. I immensely enjoyed it. It could be stressful at times. Remember when you and I were first talking, where my son or my brother said when they run into somebody that knows me, they either love you or hate you. And the people that I made train hard, you're not doing it right. This is the way you're going to do it. Not only do you have to take care of yourself, especially in crowd control, you are responsible for the guy on this side and you're responsible for the guy on this side because if you break ranks, they're going to get hurt. And the supervisors and the guys behind you are going to get hurt. You don't want to do it right? Okay, fine. But while you're here with me and the other instructors, you're going to do it right. What you do later on with your own supervisors, I don't care. But when we get mobilized, this is the way we do it. Hats and bats and all the gear
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Whenever something goes sideways and winds up on TV or social media, the answer is always, oh, that's a training issue. But one of the first things to get cut in a police budget is training.
see, I think you wrote my book with me because I covered that. See, I always say to people, cops, when I was writing my book, you were on my shoulder writing it with me because I'm just saying I'm writing down your thoughts because we're all the same. We all think these things, right? I didn't make this up. I don't have a crystal ball and, I'm all knowing and all seeing. Our experiences have taught us these things.
Yep.
Exactly what you just said, right? We all know this.
But you have to have the right people doing the training, and it has to be good training. We've all sat through just horrendously bad training, and that's where it's like, oh God, it's death by PowerPoint. It's, whatever. And
Yeah.
You're just, I don't like the direction that I saw it going through the years where, you know, for example, most fights when you have to use physical,
Oops.
aggression towards somebody to get them to comply,
Sorry about
wind up
that.
on the ground. That's just the way it happens.
Right.
And I had buddies that were suburban cops and, they just got done with an in-service and like, man, I got my ass kicked today. I'm like, oh, really? And he said, yeah, I was at this in-service at the tech school and we're doing jujitsu and it's all ground fighting, blah, blah, blah. And by happenstance, I had in service like a week later and we called it DAT, Defense and Arrest Techniques. And it was such a joke. I mean, when I first started, I wanted to be a DAT instructor because I was heavily into martial arts and boxing and all that. I'm like, oh yeah, this is perfect. And you'd have to get a physical from an outside doctor saying that you're in good enough shape to be an instructor because you go through like a little mini boot camp to do it.
Right.
And they had this female cop that looked like a bowling ball. I mean, there's no other way to describe her. She was like 5'3", 5'4", easily 250 pounds, teaching DAT at in service. And she's trying like to kick and move, and it looked like a turtle that was on its back. And people were literally giggling. And it's like, is this is what we've turned into this? And then you have an instance on the street where, yeah, a cop gets hurt or a bad guy gets hurt badly as they're trying to arrest them because these cops weren't trained. You had your 6 months in the academy where they kick your ass and you're trained up pretty good there, but that's a diminished skill. And if you
Yeah.
don't work out, if you don't, I mean, and I understand shift work, families, I've always been a gym rat. I always made time for it. Not everybody's like that. But if you let yourself go so badly that you get so fat that you can't wear a vest anymore, I mean, we've got to do something about that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. We've all seen it. And of course, the jokes about cops and donuts and all that. But they're not necessarily eating donuts, but they're eating an awful lot of rice and black beans and
Yeah.
steak, down here, and just eating like crap. And when you're not careful, it catches up on you quickly.
Yeah.
You know, in '83, I was 170 when I graduated the academy. I was trim. I could run 5 miles. I could do push-ups all day long at the end of the academy, like most of us, right? And then by the time my first daughter was born in July of '84, I was 200 pounds. And I didn't realize it that I was eating every time my ex ate, my daughter's mother. And then, of course, leaving the station, where I grew up in Brewster, New York, upstate, 55 miles north of New York City. There was one McDonald's in the next town. So it
Oh,
was a treat for us when my
oh
father
yeah.
took us, right? I come here, I get on the job, there's McDonald's everywhere in Miami. And the ones in our district, almost all the districts, the owners loved cops, free food. You break roll call before you get your first call or on your way to your first call. Hey, I'm hungry. Drive through, right? And I didn't know it, but I was eating all the time. So you're working and eating and not really exercising anymore because you're
Right.
out of the academy, right? And next thing I know, I'm 200 pounds. I'd be like, oh God, So now, salads and protein shakes and, all that stuff that we're doing now in our 60s, we're trying to fix what we broke way back then.
Yeah. But again, like I said before, it's like, hey, I just got done working 12 hours. Do I feel like going to the gym today? Unless the department makes it a priority, which I wish they would, and maybe allocate time for you to work out, is it is a part of your job. There is no getting around it. If you're on the
Only
street, it's
certain
your job.
units, only certain units get to work out on duty,
See, that's
right?
that
Our,
gets my goat.
our special response team, because when they transition from being ad hoc SRT or SWAT, as most departments call it, to a full-time unit. They were on the road before, and then they get called out, then they have to meet someplace, get their
Sure.
gear, and go to the call out, right? That's the way it was in the late '70s and early '80s. And then they became a full-time unit. Okay, so what do they do the rest of the time? They're in the gym, They're running, they're doing all kinds of stuff, they're fighting, they're doing, and yes, they all the SRT SWAT has to be in phenomenal shape to do all the stuff that they do, no question about
Absolutely.
it. K9 was the other unit that got to work out on duty because they got to be able to pick up their dogs and put them through a window or over a fence or
Or
whatever.
run with Fido. Yes,
Right.
that's a big part of it.
And then the warrants guys, warrants bureau, since they're arresting fugitives all the time and they're always getting into fights, they have to work out too. That's it. The uniformed cop on patrol that gets into more fights than anybody else
Absolutely.
doesn't have that luxury.
Uh,
So,
yeah,
but every department's the same in that respect.
yeah, it's very, very short-sighted. I wish, again, going back to my buddy that was a Vegas cop, I don't know if it's like this anymore, but you would have a platoon. When you got to a district, you were put in a platoon, you're with the same group of coppers and sergeant and lieutenant, and you have a cycle where 2 days, I think, out of the week, they would do like some kind of physical training.
yeah,
They're huge into Krav Maga. They're, different fighting stuff, different, different tactics, blah, blah, blah. Then the next day, you're at the range all day.
yeah.
So that's high speed training. It was encouraged to stay in shape. It was encouraged, to be physically fit.
I wish we could do that. We didn't have that luxury.
No, we didn't either. And it was a joke, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth. I mean, some guys, we had guys, I worked with a guy that was in the NFL, and that guy was as big as a brick house. I mean, his hands were big. Like two of my hands equaled one of his hands. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a behemoth of an individual. Then I had a recruit that played college at Michigan State. He was a right tackle, and he could bench over 500 pounds, and he could do the splits. He was just this physical specimen,
Yeah.
but he would work out 4, 5, 6 hours a day. But he wasn't
Yeah.
married. He didn't have kids. So,
Kind of like Ronnie Coleman in Texas, right?
yes, exactly. Ronnie doesn't look too good right now, unfortunately.
No, no, no. He's hurting big time.
Yeah, that's oof. Kids,
But
stay
when
off the
I
juice.
saw him in uniform, I always said, I'm glad he's on our side.
Yeah, you got that right. You got that right. But yeah, kids, stay away from the juice. Yeah, being able to lift that little extra plate or whatever, it ain't worth it. You talk
No,
to guys that have done it through the years, and I've known plenty, and it's
yeah.
like nobody in their 60s or whatever, like our age group, is like, boy, I'm so happy I did that. So I ruined this and I ruined that, and I have all these health problems.
The only guy that doesn't seem to have health problems that we can tell that still looks great is Jake Cutler.
Oh yeah. Yeah, 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 you're right.
Looks good. He didn't hurt himself too much. He's not a cripple like Ronnie is.
Right.
Um, but yes, you just stay active, work out. For me, it was always tennis. I've
Oh,
been
okay.
playing tennis all my life, so I love doing that. That's my sanctuary.
Gotcha.
But in retirement now, I go to the gym 3 days a week. I have a trainer part of that time, to help me do it right and get over the hump at 64 years old. But once I started working out, especially, with him and stuff, I feel so much better. I have so much more energy.
Oh yeah.
But you got to stay active, especially the young guys coming on. Stay active, run because you're going to run. You're going to need the endurance. When you get into a fight, 1 minute's going to feel like a lifetime.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. All right. So while reading your book, I learned some more about you. You were in the Medal of Valor and a couple life-saving awards. Tell me about that.
um, the first one was Mal, my deceased partner. We were on this side of the border with another district. We were in Hammocks District, South District, and a medical call went out across the border. A 3-year-old had drowned in a pool. And I'm driving. I always drove. I was a driving. Oh, I forgot. I was a driving instructor as well throughout most of my career. I love driving, and a huge Formula One and IndyCar fan. So there you go. Um, we heard the call. It was simulcast on our frequency from the other district. And I look at Mel and we look at each other and I go, holy shit, we're right here because it's right on the other side. I
Oh wow.
drop it and drive and we go. The mother had pulled him out of the pool. Mal took over compressions. I did breathing. We saved the kid. They airlifted him to Miami Children's Hospital, and he lived. Christopher Hill was his name. And when Mal died, I tried to find Christopher to maybe get him to the funeral or whatever,
Yeah.
let him know this is the cop that helped save your life, but I couldn't find him. And then in 1988, as a sergeant, I went to check on a couple of my rookies dealing with an assault case. And the boyfriend, who just got out of prison, battered his pregnant girlfriend. And so I went to knock on the door. The guy locked himself inside the house. He said, I'm going to kill the baby. He had a 20-month-old son in there. And when he said that, I go, guys, now. And we kicked the door off the hinges. And I got on top of him and I'm fighting with him. And he's bear hugging the baby. He's trying to squeeze the baby to death.
Uh,
And I'm punching him and he wouldn't let go. I mean, I'm pounding him just like you. I did martial arts. I
yeah.
boxed. I know how to hit. This guy was alcoholic, didn't feel anything. So I try to get my hand between his face and the baby's face.
Yeah.
The thumb was exposed, and now he's biting down on my thumb. I thought he was going to take it off. So I thought about taking my gun out and shooting him in the head, but then I was afraid for the baby.
Right. Absolutely.
So from martial arts, I remember the pressure point you have right here. So I reached under the nose, I squeezed him, I yanked him, and he opened his mouth, and I got my thumb out. And then I was able to roll him over I went on my back with him, and the guys were able to finally get his arms off and get the baby.
Yeah.
And then we took him into custody. Well, we had his blood drawn. I walked outside. I'm like this. I asked the girlfriend, does he have any diseases? She says he has AIDS.
Oh
My heart sunk.
yeah.
I call for fire rescue. The dispatcher goes, for what? I go, for me. The subject bit me. And then my lieutenant out the door. Fire rescue sent one of my rookies to the store to get a bottle of Clorox. And then they put half Clorox and half water in one of those Dixie cups they carry on the side of the fire truck.
Yeah.
They didn't know what they were doing. So they go, come here. 3 firefighters took my thumb and put it in the water.
Oh.
And as soon as the Clorox hit the wound, they held my hand. They wouldn't let me pull out.
Yeah.
So they actually saved my life.
Sure.
But then I learned, this was 98, that AIDS wasn't transmitted as easily through saliva.
Right. Right.
So anyway, I got the life-saving award for that, and the Bronze Medal of Valor.
Wow.
For almost, I guess long-term being killed by this guy. The shit of it is, Patrick, is that risk management did not want to pay for the cocktail, the AIDS cocktail that the doctor put me on because
Did
it
you?
was too expensive.
Uh,
So my ex at the time went on TV to 2 different TV stations and gave interviews saying, my husband saved a baby and put his life on the line, and the county's not backing it. And then my lieutenant at the time sent faxes to all the news outlets,
yeah.
and the mayor jumped on board and said, okay, tell risk management, pay for his medication. $3,000 for a 30-day supply. That's what it cost.
I
In 98.
uh I
Yeah.
you know, most of us didn't worry too much about getting stabbed or shot. What we worried the most about was catching hepatitis, AIDS, some slow killing disease.
Yeah.
That I know that's myself and most of my compadres, when you're smoking and joking and talking, it's like, yeah, that's what I really hope doesn't happen to me. And of course, I'm a sergeant. We get called to the guy that's a vet. He's an alcoholic. He's a drug addict. He's on a 3-day bender. He hasn't slept for 3 days. He's living with his adult sister. And she's like, I got to get him out of here. He's been in the basement. He hasn't, I don't know if he's even eaten or what he's done for 3 days. And all he's talking about is killing me and killing himself. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay. So we go down there. He is completely irrational. He's not a big dude. And I have one of my cops tase him. Every time he got tased, he giggled. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a bad day. This is a
Yeah.
really bad day. So long and short of it is, I didn't want to hurt this guy. He's a vet. You know, there was no, I needed a dart gun, is what I needed with a tranquilizer.
Right.
But we take him down. And as we're taking him down, my face hits a futon, a metal futon, breaks my orbital, breaks my nose. and he's scratching at my face, and now he's all bloody, and he's scratching my face is just chewed up. He thought we were bats. Later on, I found out he thought we were bats attacking him. And fight's over, get him in cuffs. Ambulance is there. I said, yeah, take him to the hospital. Blah blah blah. And I said, you got a bathroom I could clean up? Yeah, sure. So I clean up and I look at my face and I'm like, well, this ain't pretty. And I had a divorce hearing the next day. And I'm like, oh, this is going to go great in court, but all right. So I go outside and the adult sister is like, hey, Sarge. And I'm like, yeah. She said, I hate to say it, but I should have told you before. He's got active hepatitis. That would have been useful information.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's a little bit.
So, I go to the hospital. The doctor is like, and they took his blood, they took my blood, and he's there. He's like, it's hard to get for that to transfer over. You're most likely okay. You can get the cocktail if you want. He said, for this, probably not, but you're gonna have to get your blood tested at first every 2 weeks for like 3 months, and then we'll as long as everything's negative, we'll slowly wean you off the blood tests. But you
Yeah,
should be okay. And I'm like, easy for you to say. And I'm going through this horrendous divorce, and my soon-to-be ex-wife got into a car accident that same week, and she's wearing one of those cervical collars. So we go into court, and I look like I just did 10 rounds with Muhammad Ali, and she looks like I beat her up. So the
right.
judge is looking like, holy shit. I had two black eyes. My face just looks like hamburger meat. And I said, Your Honor, before we kick this off, I said, this and her, not that wasn't us. Two different things. And he looks at my soon to be ex. He says, Is that true, Mrs. O'Donnell? She's like, Oh, yeah, I was in a car accident. He's like, deep sigh of relief. I'm like, yeah, yeah, none of that stuff is going on. But oh my God. But the
But
city wasn't paying the hospital bills. The lieutenant that came out to do the workman's comp, she never filed it. So I had another buddy of mine that was a sergeant that worked for her, and he's like, yeah, she's a piece of shit. She doesn't know what she's doing. And I said, that's one of the easiest forms you could fill out as a sergeant is a workman's comp. It's super
yeah,
easy. I've done a zillion of them. And I'm getting, all this hate mail from the hospital. And I'm like, my life is, pretty effed up right now. I don't need this. But it was just one example of, again, you know, just that fear of, I'm going to get hepatitis. I'm going to die this slow, painful death from hepatitis.
yep.
Oh God. So yeah, I feel for you, man. That was
I had to
horrible.
get tested every 6 months for 2 years.
Oh God.